Good afternoon and welcome to the 28storms.com tropical weather update for Friday, July 22nd. Tropical Storm Brett has been downgraded and is near dissipation, and also Tropical Storm Cindy is on its way out, so we won't be emphasizing these two tropical cyclones anymore. But down toward the south, we now have newly declared Invest 90L located just to the east of the Lesser Antilles. The National Hurricane Center is closely watching this tropical wave, and they give it about a 20% chance of forming into a tropical cyclone within the next 48 hours. That will be the main focus of today's video. But also we have Hurricane Dora still to the south of Cabo San Lucas, and we'll look at that as well. The most recent official forecast from the National Hurricane Center is coming from the 11 a.m. Pacific Time advisory. Maximum sustained winds were still 85 miles per hour, and Dora is moving off toward the northwest at 8 miles per hour. We can also notice that Cabo San Lucas and immediate surrounding locations are now under a tropical storm warning because there is an outside chance that some of the outer bands could produce tropical storm force winds. Today's floater imagery of Dora shows that the storm is nothing more than a shadow of its former self. As we can see, the storm has significantly weakened in just the last 24 hours. If you recall in yesterday's video, it was nearing Category 5 hurricane status, and based on the latest trends, it's kind of hard to even argue that Dora is still a hurricane. In fact, I highly suspect that in the next upcoming package from the National Hurricane Center, they will downgrade this to a tropical storm. As we can see, convection is waning and it's really on the decline here, along with the dry air that is coming into the storm is beginning to intrude a little bit, and we're also seeing an increase in westerly wind shear. So, Cabo San Lucas, located right around here, should still be on the lookout if any of these northernmost bands of the storm begin to work its way over you. But once again, the most that you can possibly get is some tropical storm force wind gusts in excess of about 40 to 60 miles per hour. But that's the extent of it, and in fact, that might be overdone just a little bit because the storm is quickly on its way out. The remainder of the eastern Pacific, also here near the Gulf of Tehuantepec, look quiet, so we will be getting a break following Dora, so that is some good bit of news. Now, if we turn our attention to the Atlantic Basin and look at the latest surface analysis, we see that there are a number of tropical waves traversing the Atlantic Basin, but by far the strongest one is Invest 90L, the tropical wave located between 55 and 60 degrees west. Visible imagery shows that much of the western half of the basin is quiet. We still see some disorganized convection over the northern Gulf of Mexico and areas of the western Atlantic to the south and west of Bermuda. But if we look at the latest water vapor analysis, we see that much of that convection is related to upper level troughiness in those two regions. But down here we have this tropical wave, and it hasn't done much over the last 2 days, but it has slowly gotten a little bit better organized. If we go back to the latest infrared, you can see that convection is on the increase. And if we look at the latest visible imagery, we do still see that it has some cyclonic turning, especially down here toward the south, and that is where some of the greatest concentration of convection is located. There is in fact an 850 millibar vorticity max located right along the wave axis, and this has also been showing signs of increasing over the past 24 hours. This is really not so surprising if we look at some of the latest wind shear analysis coming from the SIMS website. We can see that the upper level ridge that originally started off with the tropical wave over the central Atlantic is continuing to move westward along with it. And right here between 50 and 60 degrees west, we really don't have that much in the way of vertical wind shear. We still see some higher wind shear values located in the eastern Caribbean with some westerly troughiness here. But if that upper level ridge continues to spread westward, that trough may begin to also continue moving westward with time. And as we can see, this tropical wave is more than likely going to continue moving in a general west to west-northwest direction over the short term, as the low-level steering flow is being guided by the strong low-level easterly winds to the south of the powerful mid-Atlantic subtropical ridge located to the east and south of Bermuda. Due to the strength of ridging over the central and western Atlantic, combined with the fact that this tropical wave has yet to do much in the way of significant development, the low-level steering pattern continues to suggest more of a track toward the northwest Caribbean, Florida Keys, and especially the Gulf of Mexico now in the medium range. So if anything were to form along this tropical wave axis, it will more than likely eventually make it into the southeast Gulf of Mexico. The most recent microwave satellite pass from late this morning did not reveal much of anything near the surface. We really don't see that much in the way of good low-level banding features or anything of the sort just yet. But still, if convection continues to develop near the low-level center, then this could be something to look out for in future microwave satellite passes. The wave axis is running out of time to organize into a tropical cyclone before crossing the Lesser Antilles, but interests or residents along the islands can definitely anticipate an increase in gusty winds along with a few inches of rainfall as this system begins to pass through over the next 48 hours. And then afterwards, we'll just have to wait and see if this decides to do anything in the Caribbean. But for right now, here's the latest look at the precipitable water animation, and you can really see the evolution of our tropical wave as it has been making the track or across much of the Atlantic basin. You can also see that low-level spin associated with it, along with the strong abundance of low-level moisture now beginning to work its way into the Windward and Leeward Islands. Also, if we look very quickly at the sea surface temperatures across much of the basin, this is in an area that does support tropical cyclogenesis. Obviously, sea surface temperatures are warmer than 26 degrees Celsius, but as this continues to move off toward the west-northwest, it will only be moving into more favorable water temperatures. Now we're going to view some of the latest afternoon model guidance. We'll start off with the 12Z Canadian CMC, and we're going to start off following the 850 millibar vorticity forecasts. And right off the bat, one problem that I do see is that it looks like the models may be slightly underdoing the current vorticity max of the tropical wave, so it's not fully picking up on the tropical wave as much as they possibly or probably should be. But here it is, located just to the east of the Lesser Antilles, and as I run this, you'll see that it really doesn't do much. In fact, the model completely loses the system altogether to the south of Cuba. If anything, it looks like there might be some remnant activity moving into the Yucatan Peninsula by the end of the period, but that's the most of what the Canadian CMC is currently showing this afternoon. Now we're going to look at the 12Z GFS. There's the tropical wave. And the overall evolution that the GFS is depicting is very similar to that of the Canadian CMC, but in fact it actually shows the tropical wave even less than the CMC does as it rolls across the Caribbean. By the end of the period, there's really not much in the Atlantic basin, but it is taking a stronger tropical wave off the coast of Africa by day 7. The no gaps model has a bit of a different look to it. Here's the current 850 millibar vorticity max, and this particular run takes it a bit more toward the north into the lower half of the Bahamas, and then by the end of the forecast period you can still see the vorticity max quite well over in the central Gulf of Mexico. We are now looking at the 12Z UK Met. This is the overall position of our tropical wave. This is also a 500 millibar height overlay, so we can see the strength of the subtropical ridge located over the central and western Atlantic. This is now day 1, day 2, day 3. We can see, as noted by the isobars, that if there is a tropical wave, it's still located over the central and eastern Cuban coast. By day 4, or 96 hours, we see that there's a broad area of low pressure over northern Cuba and the lower Florida Keys. By day 5, or 120 hours, we now have a broad area of low pressure here in the southeast Gulf of Mexico, but not overly strong. Perhaps the most noteworthy change is coming from the 12Z ECMWF. The model is not showing development, but as you recall, a few days ago it was trying to develop this tropical wave into a tropical storm once it gets near the Bahamas, but then over the last 2 days it's really backed off, and now as of this afternoon's latest run, it still doesn't show development, but it is beginning to pick up on the vorticity max just a little bit more once again. And here we are looking at the western half of the Atlantic basin. This is the Lesser Antilles, this is Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, Cuba, Florida, and the U.S. Gulf Coast. And there's our tropical wave right here. Now this is day 1, day 2, day 3. We really begin to see an increase in the vorticity once it gets to the north of Cuba here. And by day 4, it's approaching southern Florida. Day 5, it's over the Florida Keys. Day 6, it's to the southwest of Tampa, Florida. And day 7, we begin to see more of a westerly track, more toward the Texas coast where this run finishes, with the low tracking toward Brownsville in Corpus Christi by day 8. I'm also going to quickly show you the ECMWF ensemble member spread, and by day 4 the ensembles are showing that the tropical system can be located anywhere to the southeast of Florida, whether it be in the extreme northern Caribbean or the southwest Bahamas. By day 5 it's slowly marching across the Florida Keys. Day 6 and day 7 it sort of gets lost in the mix here over the central Gulf of Mexico, and then toward the end of the period it reemerges here a bit in the western Gulf of Mexico as it heads off toward Texas. And you can also notice that slight kink in the isobars, denoting where the general area of low pressure is most likely to be located. So, in general, most of the models are not showing development from this tropical wave as it continues to march off toward the general direction of the Gulf of Mexico. But this definitely bears watching as we continue to see more signs of development on satellite imagery. And not only that, but even the GFS that doesn't really show much in the way of organization. The GFS is still pointing a somewhat favorable picture across much of the Caribbean Sea through the medium range. This is the shear forecast, and this is the current location of our tropical wave. And notice that the wind shear is very light because we have that upper level ridge in place. And notice what happens to the upper level trough that's currently situated over the central Caribbean. If we advance the forecast, that upper level ridge begins to quickly replace the troughing. And if we look off toward the south of Hispaniola and Cuba, we see a fairly favorable pattern down there over the next few days. And this continues if we continue to look further into the period here, and we still see below normal wind shear across the southern Cuban and northwest Caribbean coastline here. So, as the Hurricane Center outlook goes, it's got about a 20% chance of development over the next 2 days, but I have a feeling that if they had to incorporate the medium range into their product, I would think that their percentages would be a little bit closer to 30 to 40%. I can't really go out on the limb and say that this will develop within the next week because there's really no model support. But even without the model support, I am a little suspicious of this wave. It's looking a little bit better day by day. The upper level environment looks good. In the medium range, even the models that don't develop this show a somewhat favorable pattern. So overall, we will be keeping a close watch on this wave. Keep it tuned here to 28storms.com through the weekend, and next week we'll continue to provide daily tropical weather video analysis like we have since day one of hurricane season 2011. So tune back here again tomorrow and have a good weekend.